One small step for a bat, but one massively tiny step for humanity. Like really, really, really tiny. Maybe we even went backwards after this. Hello humans, I'm Batsy, and yes, I have finally solved the puzzle. It took me a bit of time and tweaking around, but the bobber finally stays in place, and more importantly, the calibrated sensor no longer keeps triggering every second. Let me show you what I've done, and a little bit of a recap of how I got here. The first thing was for the bobber to stay in the middle. The deployer casts the rod in a diagonal for some reason, even if it's facing downwards. The problem was that it would sometimes cast it more far away. That was a simple fix. I just placed a glass floor, and now, whenever it casts the bobber more far away, it just hits the glass, and that makes it go back to the middle. The second issue, and basically the only important issue I was having to sustain a high percentage of stability, was the timings themselves. The problem is that this calibrated sensor should recognize whenever the bobber catches a fish, but because it also makes splash sounds, that would constantly be triggering the sensor, missing many fish in the process. So, in the end, I just needed two very simple things. 1. There is this wool attached to a piston that is connected to a reversed extender for 50 ticks, that prevents the initial splash sounds when the fishing rod gets cast into the water. I tried using sole sand in the middle to keep the bobber afloat so it wouldn't make splashing sounds once it was in position, but that didn't help at all because the bubble column was preventing treasures from appearing. Supposedly, according to the wiki, a bubble column shouldn't affect the treasure, but at least in my mod pack, it's not working. I tried 1,000 things, but in the end, I revisited the idea of an encased fan, because I already tried this at the very beginning, and discarded the idea because it wasn't working. I can't remember why it wasn't working originally, but maybe something else wasn't working, and in my head, I just discarded this as collateral damage. Regardless, an encased fan with slow speed is holding it nicely, the bobber goes into place, and the fan keeps it afloat and prevents the splashing sounds. It works for maybe 98% of the times. It very rarely makes a sound and the deployer recasts the rod, but it's reliable enough. Everything else is as simple as it gets really. I have this button here on a 2-tick link to start the farm. 2 ticks are enough to get it started if the deployer is at max speed. Then there is another link at 4 ticks, which is connected to the sensor. That's enough time for the deployer to reel the fish, and cast the fishing rod again. I also have a couple of extra ideas I want to implement. Because there isn't the issue of the several encased fans moving the items, that it's viable again to have an item collector without relying on the backpacks. I was testing with a hopper just to see where the items go. My idea is to place a couple of belts in here so they pick up the items. I'm also looking to stack a few of these together, which means that I could use the same belt for all of the deployers in the same row. As for the 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐬, I tried adding things for that, but it just wasn't reliable at all. Just like with the previous farm, the orbs go literally everywhere. That said, I have so much experience on the other farm that I'm not particularly bothered by it. If you plan on making a farm like this, I would recommend just using the backpacks to make it easier on yourself. I'm personally going to try adding a repair circuit where I'm going to manually dump 1,000 EXP levels on it. But yeah, this is my little farm. Now I need to add this into the server, and scale it up a little bit. But before getting into that, I realized as I was editing the video that I forgot yet again to plug my stuff. I'm pretty bad at remembering that I should probably advertise my own things, so let's speedrun that really quick. I have a Ko-Fi page where you can become a member. Tier 2 fangs and above get access to my SMP, so that's pretty cool. You can also become a member for whatever recurring amount you desire, and even do one-time donations if you want. All supporters get access to the stuff I post in here, which is mostly sneak peeks of the projects I'm working on, which of course, includes one-time donations too. I also have a throne page with some of the stuff I need in case you want to send a gift, and there is also the option of suggesting GIFs if you want to. I try to add titles and descriptions for the GIFs I have posted, to tell a bit about why I want them or need them. Now yes, let's get to building this bad boy. After countless hours of tweaking and fixing things. Oh my gosh, I just realized how cute the goggles look with the new skin, I love it. But anyway, look at it, what a masterpiece, it's so beautiful. This has honestly been one of the farms I had the most fun with. There have been so many little things to consider, and so many new things and toys to use for it. But before getting into that, I wanted to quickly show something that I've started doing on the side. Because the farm is already pretty full of bone meal, there is tons of iron in there, wood, experience, you name it. So I have left it offline for several days now. What I realized is that it's quite tricky to turn this farm offline, because even if you lock the deployer, it doesn't mean that the fishing rod isn't active. To properly turn it off, you gotta lock everything. Then you gotta carefully unload the chunks, so the fishing rods stop working. It's a whole deal, so I'm planning on adding a system that removes all of the fishing rods from it. This might very well be the worst idea ever, but I thought it would be funny. I'm essentially going to use a wrench on a deployer to swap the direction of the funnels. That way, all of the rods will be extracted from the deployers, and I will invent something to store them out. It's still a work in progress because I'm reaching the maximum capacity of the steam engine constantly, so I need to find a way of being power efficient. But anyway, this is something I might continue doing between episodes. I thought it would be a fun way of disabling the farm, because it's also destroying my FPS. As for the new fishing farm goes, it's pretty much done. I think it's done anyway. I keep adding pieces of redstone here and there, but I'm happy with how it is right now. Where should we start? Sure, let's start with a little disclaimer. I have done several things just because I thought it was funny, or because I thought it was cool looking. Keep that in mind because you might see something and think, well, why didn't you do it in that other way? The answer is likely, because I thought it was cool to do it this way. The most obvious new addition is the drain floor. I was testing out random stuff, and I thought it was super cool looking. It kinda gives the vibe of fishing nets. There are no drains though, those are the disenchanters, from Enchantment Industries. The idea is that sometimes, the orbs bounce deep enough that they reach these drains, so it stores some of the experience that it produced to repair the tools later on. This is highly unnecessary because I already have too much experience, and also, it's incredibly unreliable. Most of the orbs end up all over the place, so it might very well be gathering like 30% of them, if at all. But still, this prevented me from having to manually dump experience into the system, and it's honestly pretty cool looking. You might have noticed that one of the blocks is a copper block. That's because the bobber gets stuck in those drains, so I had to keep one full block to allow it to bounce to the surface. And because I ended up doing this with the floor, it means that I couldn't do the idea I had with belts to collect the items, so instead, I just placed some barrels with advanced magnets to gather all of the items, which then get moved along this line, where I'm eventually going to build some sort of storage system. Right now I'm only storing the Neptune bounties and nuggies, because well, you can see how many of them I have already, and this was one single hour of fishing. The rest is a bit more tricky to explain. I have changed several things. I'm using the same belt loop as in the other farm, which removes the broken rods from the system to get repaired in the station, and then they go back into place, or loop around until they find a place. That ensures that even if 4 rods need to be repaired at the same time, it doesn't mess up the rest. The deployer itself is located 2 blocks to the west of the spot where the bobber will land. I learned that for some reason, deployers cast towards the east regardless of the orientation of the deployer itself. I have no idea if this is intended behavior, and I have no idea if it's going to act that way in your worlds too. This is how it's acting in my SMP, so I made the farm according to that. As for the main mechanism itself, there is a lot to cover here, but keep in mind one thing, this is how I personally wanted to do it for various reasons. There are many other ways to do this, so if you want to do something similar, don't hesitate to adapt the redstone circuits to your liking. That aside, the main component is the calibrated skulk sensor, which is calibrated to a redstone strength of 2, which is the splash sounds, and a couple of other things. While the farm is idle, the piston will always be extended, so the sounds are able to reach the calibrated sensor. To turn it back online, we can press the button, which will send a quick pulse to the main circuit. That unlocks the reversed pulse extender for a 2-tick duration, which is enough for the deployer to cast the fishing rod. That will immediately trigger the piston, which will retract, preventing the sensor from receiving any sounds. That is to make sure that the initial splashes in the water won't trigger the sensor. After a short duration, the piston goes back into place, and waits for the bobber to catch a fish. When that happens, the sensor will trigger. That will send a signal through 2 extenders, which will increase the duration that the deployer is unlocked. That way, it will be able to reel the fish, and cast again before it gets locked again. While all of that is going on, there is a side circuit that will trigger every time that a cycle happens. So long as the circuit doesn't take more than 1 minute to cycle, being because something triggered the sensor, or the rod caught a fish, or whatever it is, the pulse won't do anything. But if it takes more than 1 minute to cycle, the circuit will react as if the machine is stuck, and will force it to reset. That's how I'm preventing it from getting stuck whenever the machine cycles wrongly, or something happens that messes the timings. This is something that I'm still figuring out how exactly I want to do it. I have a different idea here that should do the same thing, but it should be a whole lot more reliable. The first pulse is ticking the extender every time the machine cycles. Because the extender is reversed, it won't go online unless it hasn't received a signal for a minute, which should mean the machine is stuck. After that, it will send a single pulse to the system, so the circuit doesn't lock by the extender being active. I kind of want to do this in a smaller way, or at least make it so it doesn't go this long, because I have a plan to decorate this, and any extra wider block is gonna make it worse. I know I could use links and be done with it, but I'm trying my best to minimize the amount of links I'm using. Oh well, that is a problem for future 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐬. What about the rates? How much does this farm make? Well, I had to remove most of the loot because it was being too much, at least until I had some sort of storage. So right now there are just a bajillion boxes, but let's run this farm for 10 minutes while I do some editing, and that should be a decent example of what you can expect from it. Alright, that should be 10 minutes. I mean, it's pretty good, isn't it? I don't think I'm going to keep everything. In fact, I might honestly just burn it all except for maybe the books and the Neptunian stuff. My main concern is that there might very well be a trillion different book combinations, so I have no idea how much storage I actually need for this. The stack upgrades won't work unless the enchants in the book are literally the same. There is also the reason that we don't really need the books, to be honest. 𝐋𝐲𝐬𝐬 already has a good enchanting setup. But that's also a future 𝐋𝐢𝐬𝐬 problem. For now, I'm going to start decorating this thing, and see what I end up doing about the storage. So 𝐋𝐢𝐬𝐬, cue the time lapse. The next day. It's so glorious. Look at it, doesn't it look amazing? A friend of mine suggested me that I could make a ship around it, and it reminded me of a video that Mr. Beardstone did recently, where he made a tank ship. So I thought, yeah, that's not a bad idea, I can probably do that. You might have noticed the trails of ice on the ship. Apparently, while I was sleeping, this little fella came over, and it looks like it froze some parts. We're going to take a look at that in a second. For now, let's check the couple of changes I have made, and there are some additions too. As I mentioned before with the pulse I was testing with, I ended up using a pulse, into an extender, into a pulse. It's the most reliable way from what I have tested out. The extender here is acting as the clock essentially. I also had to rearrange the redstone a little bit to fit it without a link, but it's not too bad, I would say. I don't think I'm going to expand on the redstone any further, it has enough features and functionalities as it is. I have also added this storage system, finally, but let's go one step at a time. The initial barrel is already filtering most of the items with a void upgrade. Those are things that I honestly don't feel like having a trillion of them. Maybe the bows and rods I might keep to give them away for free or something, but the fish obviously we don't want any of it. From there, it's only keeping the Neptune's gifts, the name tags, and the enchanted books. From those, the gifts will come to this corner to be placed by the deployer, so all of the items get sorted properly. It's the same idea as doing a shulk unloader, but it doesn't require you to wait before breaking it. If it spills the contents, they will go to the chute anyway. From there, it goes into the actual storage, where it also keeps the name tags and books from before. And the rest is fairly simple. A couple of barrels for each one of the items, which I'm not too sure why, it's never going to fill up a single one. Then I have generic barrels to store all of the various enchanted books. I added several to see how many variations of books are there, because eventually they should start stacking up on the same ones, and I found out something interesting. It has been at this level for many hours now, and it's not growing further. I'm curious to see if it's ever going to grow bigger, because I assume some books might be more rare to find than others. Or if this is literally all of the variants that this specific world has. Because in a different world, I did got a clean mending book, and so far I haven't seen one of those. There is plenty of storage, so I will find out in a couple of weeks, see how far it goes. I think those are all of the new additions, so let's go check on that snail. see what it wants. Hello little fella, how are you doing today? It's quite cute, I must say. You have left me some of your ice, haven't you? I'm honestly not mad about it, it looks cool. It gives the vibe that the ship hasn't moved in a long time, which I think it's neat. I had to remove some of the ice that was closer to the machines, just to prevent it from interfering with the farm. You wouldn't want to ruin my redstone, would you? Of course not, no one would be so silly to touch my redstone, surely. I also spoiled myself of the surprise because, when I saw it from underneath, I noticed that there are a couple of chests inside the ice. And now that I'm looking at it, it seems like the snail learned to use World Edit or something similar. I could recognize those patterns anywhere. Alright, you have my interest, what do you have inside? Nothing. Literally nothing on either of them. Well, that's anticlimactic. Have some food, you are welcome to stay if you behave. I already have weird sounds from the depths I dug recently, another creature never hurt anyone. I was about to wrap up for the episode when I found out why aren't there any more books in this barrel. For some random reason, it filled this much, and then it moved to a different chest to dump the items on. I honestly have no clue what kind of order it is using to fill them up. But either way, I will clean that up between episodes. I'm not too interested in storage systems right now. Next episode is going to be quite the big one, and it might honestly take me a couple of weeks to do. Normally, I try to split big projects between few episodes, but this next one is going to be a special one, and I need to contact some people, need to figure out some technical difficulties, and do stuff behind the scenes that it doesn't really matter right now. What matters is that the episode might get delayed some days. I will try to aim for next weekend, but assume that it might take me a couple of weeks. If there is no video next week, it means that I'm still working on it. I'm super excited about it, it's going to be a really fun project. As for this farm goes, let me know if you would like the schematic of it. I doubt I'm going to make a tutorial because I covered all of its components already, and to be honest, troubleshooting this thing is a nightmare. I might just upload a schematic and everyone can try to use it at their own risk. But with that out of the way, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.